Good morning and good afternoon, or good evening for some people. This is Jules Lancey with the Global Network of Healthcare Innovation Centers in partnership with the Innovation Learning Network. We are excited to share today's Exponential TechTuesday, Health in Space. Over the past few months, we've taken you on a deep dive into each of the exponential technologies, and it's time for our series to pivot to focus on the more applied use of these exponentials. So why health in space? The unique opportunity to travel outside of the Earth's atmosphere means subjecting our body to a different set of environmental factors. Today, astronauts undergo a rigorous decompression process after space travel, so to give their bodies a chance to reacclimate to the conditions on Earth. But during their journey in space, astronauts face similar health needs as their counterparts on Earth, staying healthy, maintain proper psychological focus, and more. And we'll hear more about this from our speakers. But first, a few housekeeping items. You have been muted upon entry to avoid background noise and disruptions. If you are joining us by phone only and wish to chime in during the Q&A, please press *6 to take yourself off mute. Please hold on Q&A until the end of the session. However, feel free to use the chat box during the presentation and comments to make sure that you select the option Everyone from the drop-down menu. This presentation is a contribution to the GNIC and the ILN, which means that you can live tweet throughout, and we will drop the session's social media handles and hashtags in the chat box shortly. Now, I'd like to introduce our presenters, and we have a stellar panel. We start off with Dorit Donoviel. She is the director of the Translational Research Institute for Space Health, and she is working with that institute in close relation with NASA on innovative technologies and approaches that will keep astronauts healthy during deep space exploration missions. Second, we have Olav Krigolson, who is a neuroscientist and the Associate Director of the Center for Biomedical Research at the University of Victoria. And Olav will talk about using portable EEG devices for fatigue studies in healthcare and also Mars habitats. Third, we have Shawna Pandya, who is a physician surgeon and citizen scientist astronaut candidate. Really cool. Shawna has published a lot about various space health topics and about space spin-off technologies that have benefited terrestrial medicine. And finally, Pierre-Alexandre Fournier, who is an entrepreneur and designer and the founder of Hexoskin wearable body metrics. And they are designing smart sensor shirts. And he will focus on how Astroskin, their product, will fly to the International Space Station this summer. We have a very broad audience coming from the various members and partners of ILN, GNIC, and their networks. And this time we have a considerable audience coming from the space sector as well, which is quite exciting. So I think that's a good point to stop the talking from my side and give the virtual floor to Dorit. I'm very much looking forward to it. So please, Dorit, enlighten us.
Hi, everybody. So I'm saying hello from Houston, Texas. And I'll start by correcting the pronunciation of my name is Dorit Donoviel, and it's okay. Everybody slaughters it, so it's just fine. So I just want to tell you that I pretty much have the coolest job on the planet, I think. I get to work closely with NASA and scope out innovative health technologies on behalf of the space program. But because I'm not part of the government, but working in cooperation with them, I'm able to do partnerships with industry and foreign entities a little bit easier than having to do a lot of the paperwork. Our mission essentially with the Institute, it's TRISH for short, for Translational Research Institute for Space Health. We make grants. We make grants that are federal funds to universities and companies that are doing really kind of disruptive, cutting edge research that will in about 10 years time really make a difference for our capabilities to do healthcare in a tin can on the way to Mars. So let me paint a picture for you. You've got 3 of your colleagues that your boss picked out for you to spend 30 months together in a tin can on the way to Mars without any possibility of resupply or emergency egress, you're on your way. But for better or worse, you've got to get along with these people. There may be geologists, there are scientists, maybe you're lucky and you have a physician on board, likely engineers, and you're going to have to do healthcare on yourself and your crewmates. With the ground, we have up to 20 minutes delay in communication at its worst. And there may be times when there's a loss of communication as well with mission control. So you have to be able to be autonomous. And while we send as healthy of people as possible, by the time folks are experienced enough in spaceflight to go to Mars on a mission like this, they're going to be middle-aged and they're going to have probably predisposition to certain genetic diseases, for example, cardiovascular disease or hypertension, et cetera. We're certainly going to send the most healthy people we can, but sometimes the space environment, the microgravity, the radiation environment, which we cannot shield against completely, can exacerbate or even create new medical conditions in these humans that are there for 30 months or so. So you're going to have to monitor your own health. You're going to have to take care of infections in space. We won't be able to send your lab work out to the clinic. There isn't one on the way. There's no Walgreens to pick up medicine. We have to send everything with you. The food that we send along, basically everything is packaged, so you're not going to get a lot of fresh foods. We're hoping to be able to grow some fresh foods, but there's not going to be a lot of real estate on board the spaceship, as you can imagine, and so we're not going to be able to grow a lot of fresh foods. So the concern is, you need healthy bacteria to keep your gut healthy. Your immune system may be compromised because of the radiation environment and just not eating the foods that you're used to here on Earth, et cetera. And so there's a variety of things that we need to worry about. So our institute basically scours the world and speaks to a lot of very smart folks who are innovating in healthcare. And what we envision essentially, and the value add for the companies and universities solving these problems is it's really not just a small market for space where really a handful of people will use these technologies. The whole idea is that if you can create a capability that will allow you to do autonomous healthcare, you're basically making the healthcare more affordable and easier to use in the home. And we know with our healthcare issues here in the States, it's very expensive. Folks end up having to go to clinic or hospital. They can't get there often because of transportation issues if they're senior citizens and they don't drive. So if you can bring healthcare into the home, that actually solves a lot of problems for our healthcare here on Earth. So that's the model we're working towards. Should I talk about specific issues with regards to certain particular medical conditions? I don't know if I've gone too long or if
no, sure, you have a couple of minutes left. You could share a bit about some of the projects that you're working on that.
Sure. Sure. So we're really trying to be out of the box. And one area we're very interested in is the microbiome. So if folks don't know what that is, it's half the cells on your body or in your body are not your own. They're microorganisms. And it turns out that they're very important for our health. They can regulate your mood. They can regulate your immune function. They can certainly regulate how your tummy feels. And even they can regulate how you respond to medications. It's been quite a new area of research. So we're very interested in this area. And I think I've mentioned that in space, we're not going to have the variety of foods that we take for granted here on Earth. We're not going to have a kombucha that you can, drink, or a nice yogurt culture for you to drink every day. So we're looking at how to deliver the microbiome in new ways. For example, we have an investigator, Bob Langer at MIT, that's investigating an in-resident device that will sit inside your tummy, essentially, and will dissolve with time, that will slowly release good bacteria. So that's one possibility that we're looking at. Another is to personalize using some cells from your gut, which we can get, as you can imagine how we get that. It's very easy to do, but I'm not going to mention. And basically, we can culture and determine how your particular cells react to different microbes. And so we can personalize a probiotic treatment for you personally and for the astronauts who will go to space. So those are some of the things we're looking at. And then also in the future, we're going to be looking at the effects of manipulating the microbiome to the effects of, for example, radiation or confinement or other types of stressors.
Very cool. And so you're already working on insidables. Maybe, are you working already on some digital health solutions?
Yeah, so for example, one concern that we have is how folks will react to confinement, and behavioral health is actually something that we don't take for granted. A 30-month mission in a tin can is quite different than a year-long mission even for our astronauts. And so some of the digital health solutions that we're looking at is tracking behavior and letting you know when you seem to be moving less, or you seem to have some stressors that indicate that you may be starting to go down a path that you may want to mitigate. So the other thing that has been developed is psychiatrists on a laptop. So we know that cognitive behavior therapy, when it's implemented by a software program, can be as effective as talking to a human therapist. And so with that, you can actually go through a diagnosis of yourself if you're stressed, if you have a conflict, if you're depressed, if you have anxiety, and apply an artificial intelligence-based cognitive behavior therapy on a laptop to yourself. And so it can be very private, and it appears to be quite effective in mitigating the problems.
All right. And then maybe finally, can you share us a bit about the funding you have available to give away?
Sure. So we have multiple ways to fund people. We do have to have, because it's U.S. federal funds, we have to have a U.S.-based entity, but we can partner with folks who are working internationally for goods and services. We can buy products from internationals as well. We have annual solicitations for large grants that can go all the way from $400,000 a year for 2 to 3 years up to $850,000 a year for program grants. We also have an industry program, which we partner with a consortium for innovations in, oh my God, I always get the CIMMIT out of Mass General Hospital. They put out a call for us for companies in particular. We also have postdoctoral fellowships. We just released a solicitation yesterday, so check our website for postdocs. Our website is bcm.edu/space health, or if you just search space health, Baylor College of Medicine or BCM, you'll probably find us. And we also have a program where you can submit an idea for a proposal at any time, and all of those funding opportunities are online.
All right, thanks a lot. I think there's a lot of opportunity for both sectors, the space sector and the healthcare space, so to call it.
Right.
Thanks a lot, Dorit.
Sure, pleasure.
Next up, we have Olav, who will talk about his work with portable EEG devices in hospitals and in the space sector. The floor is yours, Olav.
Thank you, Jules. So just want to talk a bit about some work that we've been doing in my lab as a part of a collaborative project where we're using portable EEG technology to measure brain health and performance. So, as noted, when humans go to Mars, there are going to be a lot of challenges with this. For example, getting there is going to be difficult, of course. Radiation will be an issue once you're there. Low gravity environment, resources once you're there, distance from Earth. What we're really focused on are the human factors. So what happens to people, and how can you monitor that, and how can you improve human performance, if you will. So the project, I want to tell you about two projects, actually. The project we're starting is with the High Seas Mars Habitat in Hawaii. and if you don't know much about high seas, there's several Mars habitats. The habitat is designed to study human factors, so it's not a spaceship per se, but it's designed to be an analog for a spaceship. And what we're really interested in is the astronauts themselves. So on these long duration missions, they're going to experience a lot of changes and have to deal with a lot of factors. And what we're primarily focused on is the idea of fatigue. And fatigue leads to injuries. We know that, and fatigue leads to mistakes. And if you think about the scope of these missions, one mistake could potentially become a disaster. So how are we going to do that? Well, I'll first say that we know that sleep and fatigue is a bad thing. There's a ton of research out there that shows that when you're sleep deprived, it's almost the same as being impaired with alcohol. So how do you assess sleep deprivation, or more importantly, fatigue? Well, there are a lot of ways to do this, but what we're trying to do in my lab is develop a brain-based way of doing this. So actually measure brain function and try to capture whether someone is tired or not. Now, the way we do that is using portable EEG technology. So there's two pieces to this. First, we're using the Muse headband. Muse headband is made by Interaxon Incorporated. It's a Canadian company out of Toronto, and it's basically a portable EEG system. It's iPhone or iOS based, and it's developed as a meditation assistant, but what we've done is be able to unlock the data coming from the Muse and use it for other things. The other piece of the puzzle is an app made by Suva, which is a UVic spinoff company, and the app is essentially a fatigue assessment tool. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the science behind it, and then tell you about application, and bring it back into space. So right now, what you're seeing is circle flashing, and we like to call it in my lab the world's most boring video game. But what happens when you see that circle is your brain naturally responds to that. It's processing that there's something there, and it's flashing. And that's our game, all right? We show people a series of circles. We actually use two colors. Some are green, some are blue, and the colors don't really matter. The trick is that some of the circles are infrequent. We call this an oddball effect, and your brain detects that these things are less frequent than the other circles. And what we do is, while you're seeing these circles, we record brain activity. So you're looking at the human electroencephalogram, or what people call brain waves, and we're recording that. Now, a lot of people are familiar with EEG in this context and realize that you can record what we call continuous EEG. However, we use it a little bit differently. What we do is look at what's called an event-related brain potential, or an ERP response. So when the circle appears, your brain responds to it. And if you look at the green line on the figure there, what you'll see is the brain's response to that circle. The early bump at about 200 milliseconds is negative. That's called an N200, and it's general processing of the stimulus. The larger bump to the right is called a P300, and that's essentially your sort of updating of the fact that this thing is appearing and how often it's appearing. Now, this event-related response is really interesting, and it's what we're leveraging. Now, we haven't discovered this. ERPs have been around for quite a long time. What's novel, if you will, is the fact that you can measure this with a headband and an iPhone. Now, we've done this primarily in a hospital environment to date. So what you're looking at are medical students here in Victoria, British Columbia, and they're working with a simulated robot patient, and they actually perform 12-hour shifts. And the whole point is to get them to experience in a simulation what it's like to be working in an emergency room or in a hospital environment. What we do with them is, at various points throughout the shift, we pull them aside and we do a fatigue assessment. Now, you're actually looking at a prototype version here. The gentleman sitting down is wearing a Muse headband, as you can see, and we're actually running the test off of the laptop in this case. This was a couple of years ago, and we should probably update our imagery, but now, of course, we're doing this off of a phone. And they play the oddball game that I told you about, the flashing circles. What's important is that the response to that stimulus in the game, the response to that circle is reduced when you're tired. And this is quite a reliable effect. So again, the science behind this isn't new. The new part is making it portable. So the fact that you can do this off an iPhone with one of these headbands in 5 minutes. So now we can pull aside a doctor in this environment, and in 5 minutes, they can do a neural assessment of fatigue. The way we use it is we build up a baseline. Now, the blue bars represent the scores, if you will, of each time you play the game. And there's variation. It depends on whether you're rested, how well you slept, if you've exercised, if you've eaten breakfast or not. And you can capture sort of normal, healthy brain function. What's important for what we're doing with this is when you're tired, your scores fall below that range. So that brainwave response is reduced, and therefore you have a portable fatigue detection system. These are data from our actual app. It's me, so sadly you can see the days when I'm tired and the days when I'm not. But you're looking on the top left, you see a nice large P300 response. Positives down in this instance due to an electrical convention. And on the top left, you see me rested. The bottom left, you see me tired. And you see a summary of scores. And you see that pattern of variation with the score on the far right being the negative 1.49, me being extremely tired, which is yesterday. So glad I got a good night's sleep last night. And the whole point of this fatigue assessment tool is to bring it back to Mars. So as the astronauts are on these long journeys, we want to know if they're tired. We want to know how their brain is functioning. And you could build this assessment into part of their daily routine. So they could have an iPad or an iPhone. They don't need cellular service because, of course, that won't work. And they can do this brain health or fatigue assessment. So far, as you've seen, we've shown that it works in a hospital environment. We can detect when doctors and nurses are tired in medical students. We've done this in sports and shown that we can relate fatigue to performance in sport. So when athletes are tired, they perform worse. When they're rested, they perform better. But as opposed to using self-report, we're relying on a direct neural measurement. We've recently deployed this to a mine in northern BC. If you're not familiar with mining, the equipment's quite large, quite dangerous, and when people get tired, some pretty horrific accidents can happen. And in a couple of months, once the island of Hawaii settles down a little and the next Mars Habitat mission launches, we'll be deploying this in the Mars Habitat so that the astronauts in the simulation can do portable fatigue assessment. So by combining the Muse headband with the app made by Suva, we're basically in a place where we can directly measure brain health and performance, and we can detect fatigue. We're also working on other applications I should note at this time. So right now we're looking at the possibility of measuring depression and some other psychological factors, which could, of course, again, impact performance. So I'd just like to say thank you at this point, and I appreciate you having me.
Thank you, Olav. That's incredible work using these portable devices, and it's incredible that you can do it now. What you said, neural assessments of fatigue in 5 minutes because of this portability of the devices. Thanks a lot. Shawna is up next, Shawna Pandya. She will talk about her work with space health topics from the physician-surgeon perspective. I saw you come in, Shawna. You can unmute yourself, and then the floor is yours.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly, thanks.
Perfect, thanks so much for having me. So I'm going to try sharing my screen and we'll see how that works.
There's a big green button at the bottom of the screen that you can use for that.
Perfect, can you guys see?
It's initiating.
Yes, there it is.
Perfect. All right, so thank you so much for having me. My name is Dr. Shawna Pandya. I am a physician, surgeon, citizen scientist, astronaut candidate. So and my areas of research entail space spin-off technologies, spin-in and spin-out, which we'll be talking about today, psychological resilience in long-duration spaceflight, logistics of reproduction and sexuality in long-duration spaceflight, And then a previous area of research has been on NeuroArm, a neurosurgical robot based off Canadarm Technologies, which is a perfect example of a spin-off that has been brought to terrestrial medicine. So my hopes for you are to give you an idea of what space spin-in, spin-off technologies entail, why we care about them, taking a step back at the bigger picture, looking at how this frames innovation, how this can be a two-way street between spin-in and spin-off, and then how this might be applied to the exponential community, exponential thinking, and then talking about opportunities for collaboration. So I know time is short, so we'll get going. So when you look at places like the International Space Station, a remote village in Africa or India, the Arctic, the Antarctic, and the Aquarius Reef Research Base, what do all of these locales have in common? And the answer is that they're all remote, resource limited, and constrained. They're all extreme environments, and they're perfect locales in which to practice extreme environment medicine. The upside of that is they're excellent drivers of technology and innovation. So focusing on a second solely on space medicine, if you remember anything about space, is that space is trying to kill you. The environment is extremely hostile. So between microgravity, increased radiation exposure, disrupted circadian rhythms, if you're on the International Space Station, you'll experience sunset sunrise every 90 minutes, so 16 every 24 hours. You're in a constrained space. There's lots of vibration, lots of noise, and it's not easy to get access to medical care. It's not immediate, so you're pretty constrained. Speaking specifically to microgravity itself, this leads to muscle atrophy, decreased bone density and bone loss, fluid shifts, including increased cardiac fluid load, congestion, increased intracranial pressure and intraocular pressure. So it's not as fun as it can seem being in space. There's a lot of medical considerations. So any technology that is involved with operational space medicine needs to be portable. It needs to be lightweight. It costs about $10,000 US per kilogram to transport something to space, including launch costs. It needs to be hardy, especially when you're in a high radiation environment, and it needs to be accurate. So as you can imagine, the space environment is a great breeding ground and driver for innovation. So let's talk a little bit about spin-in, spin-off technologies. What I'm going to talk to you next is based on one of the book chapters I've written on the subject called From Orbit to OR, Space Solutions for Terrestrial Challenges in Medicine. So to give you a broad overview, when we talk about constraints, it's not specific to the space environment. And a lot of good has come out of the space program. We often get people questioning why explore space, why spend so much money on the space program when there's so many problems on Earth that need to be addressed. And to be fair, it's not a false dichotomy. A lot of benefit from being able to provide portable, lightweight solutions in space have benefit on Earth. And to take you through the images here on this slide, in the top left corner, we have portable iodine resin water filters that have been used on the International Space Station, or the ISS, that have been spun off for remote villages in Kenya, I believe it is. In the middle on top there, you can see portable handheld ultrasound developed for the ISS that's now being used for prenatal and antenatal care in Inuit populations in Canada. The kids who look pretty happy there with the space blanket on their heads are using a thermal blanket with 97% reflectivity that was, again, developed for space. Coming to the bottom row, lightweight, portable, deployable antennas. that can bring comms to areas that would otherwise have none, so perfect for disaster situations. Air scrubbers to keep the atmosphere clean, and portable on the ISS have been used to increase the longevity of produce during transport and increase the air quality in doctors' and surgeons' offices. And then in that last panel there, down on the bottom right, portable refrigerators have allowed us to increase the longevity of vaccines in areas where refrigeration and electricity is otherwise not available. So I'm going to spend the next couple of slides focusing on specific areas of spin-off in medicine. So looking at diagnostics, imaging, and treatment, there are numerous examples, and one of my favorite examples is charge-coupled devices on the Hubble telescope have actually been spun off to increase resolution for mammography and breast cancer screening. When it comes to treatment and care, some of the same materials and same telemetry that has been used for on board the space station has also been used to develop better pacemakers, alternatives in angioplasty, and even electrical stimulation for pain management, which was initially used to see if it could prevent muscle atrophy aboard the ISS in microgravity. Switching over to public health, safety, and research, the examples are numerous. And the fireproof paint that has been used aboard launch vehicles has also been spun off to the Indy 500 and professional car racing to be used on those cars. Insulation on spacesuits has been spun off for Arctic wear. And even for improving brakes, it's one of the examples of spin-off technologies from the space sector. And as much as we know about space, there's a lot of questions to be answered about what exactly the long duration effects of space are on, and the microgravity environment are on the human body. And it's particularly relevant with private and public entities like NASA, like SpaceX, proposing to go to Mars, proposing to colonize Mars, when we don't even know what the minimum gravity prescription is to survive long-term in space. Is 1/3 gravity on Mars, is that enough? Is 1/6 gravity on the moon enough? Because we just don't know at this point. What we do know from our research is that bone loss is a big concern in microgravity, and that research has fueled osteoporosis studies here on Earth. Aging, immunity, decompensation, so orthostatic hypotension when astronauts return to Earth, when the blood pools back in the feet and astronauts, you'll see them being carried out of their spacecraft. They're unable to walk because they're so decompensated. That's field research back on Earth. So as you can see, there's actually a lot of overlap. So it's not this false dichotomy of let's spend money on space or let's spend money on terrestrial medicine and research related to that. They actually fuel one another. Telemedicine is another great example. So we talked a little bit about NeuroArm, one of the projects I worked on. So Canadarm is that big robotic arm outside the International Space Station, and the same company, MDA Robotics, that helped that built Canadarm also was involved with the making of NeuroArm. And that was spun off to make this robot that can do brain surgery, that is MRI compatible, filters out vibration, can lock its axis, and work on a millimeter scale and micrometer scale compared to the human hand. So that's just one example of telemedicine. Examples in dermatology, teleradiology, portable blood analyzers used aboard the ISS are being used here on Earth. So I hope to convince you that there is a lot of areas of overlap when it comes to spin-off. I want to talk a little bit now about the opportunities in space medicine for spin-in and spin-off. So from the examples, I hope to have convinced you that there's a lot of benefit to come from the space world to terrestrial medicine, both for the developed world and the developing world. But there's also a lot of opportunity for spin in. So there's a lot, and when we talk about the drivers, we talked about the constrained environment, the mass and resource and volume limited environment, but we also look at the drivers. So this is where the innovation aspect comes in. We look at probabilities. What is the probability of X medical condition occurring? What is the risk if it happens? If it's a very remote but very high risk medical complication that occur, it's more likely to be considered and mitigated against than something that's very low risk and low probability. How simple is this innovation to use? And then what are our constraints? So we talked about in space, you're limited by what you can transport, by the mass, the costs of launching per kilogram, and also by the volume that you have to store things. So how this all ties into innovation and thinking exponentially is there's a lot of room, there's a lot of questions to be answered. There's a lot of room for collaboration, a lot of room for innovation, a lot of room for creating portable technologies that are equally important in any extreme environment, any resource-limited environment. And as a side benefit for those who might question why we do space exploration, there's an increased awareness of space technologies. So I hope to have given you a good overview. Happy to talk about collaboration opportunities with the various citizen scientist astronautic projects I'm involved with. So briefly, they're called Project Possum, Phenom, Association of Spaceflight Professionals, Untethered Exploration, and Final Frontier Designs. So if you have ideas of technologies you want to work on deploying or collaborating or testing in a remote environment like a Mars analog situation, I'm happy to chat further. I know I'm out of time now. I do have to run back to clinic right now, but really happy to talk offline. So my contact information is here, Shawna Pandya at gmail.com and at Shawna Pandya on social media.
Thank you, Shawna, for that fantastic talk from the medical perspective and translating the extreme environment to the need for novel technologies that benefit space health and Earth's healthcare too. And also thanks for taking the time in between your patient care schedule. That's fantastic. And I'm sure people will contact you. Thanks. So last but not least is Pierre-Alexandre Fournier, who will talk about using Hexoskin wearables in the International Space Station this summer. We just heard about the costs of bringing the product up, but I guess you will share us about all the benefits of the shirt as well. The floor is yours, Pierre.
Yes, thank you. Let me share my screen with you. Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Excellent. So thanks for having me. I'm Pierre-Alexandre Fournier, CEO and co-founder of Hexoskin, a company based in Montreal, Canada. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the company and then about human spaceflight and what we're doing in the space program. So we started the company in 2006. Our goal was to create an artificial intelligence for healthcare, for chronic diseases, to help people age at home and make healthcare more accessible. The problem we found is that AI needs data, and so if you want to collect long-term vital signs data from people, well, we needed to create a platform for connected health and wearable sensors. So that's what we've developed, and we're known now for our smart clothing products for vital signs monitoring that are being used by clinical research, elite sports, defense, security, aerospace organizations all over the world. And we've been working with space agencies like the Canadian Space Agency and NASA since 2012. So about human space flight. So we send a lot of things to space. There's a lot of launches, but there's very few people that have been in space so far, a little bit more than 500 people. I think it's 562. Here you have all the missions that have occurred since the beginning of the 60s in space. And at no point in time there has been more than 16 people in space. So it's a very small group of people that have lived this experience, and we expect it to be something more frequent in the future. So there's a lot of challenges related to that. So the previous speakers talked a bit about it. So most of the human spaceflight has occurred actually very close to Earth in the International Space Station, or the previous technologies in the previous lab that we had in orbit. And very few people went to the moon. But what we see as the future of human spaceflight is that we'll have more people around the moon or on the moon, and people reaching Mars. At some point, NASA is going to be funded appropriately to send people to Mars, but we're still getting ready. There are huge challenges for long travels like that, and we're definitely not ready today. So there's a lot of health issues in space. So again, other speakers have talked about that. There's issues about vision problems developing in microgravity, and when the astronauts come back, problems with intracranial blood pressure, muscle loss, bone loss, radiation. So there are contingency programs to prevent these things and prevent damages, which include more than 2 hours per day of physical training. But it's not enough to slow the accelerated aging process in space. Another problem that they have in space is the circadian rhythm problems. So if you're in the International Space Station, you see 16 sunrises a day. And so basically your body is completely disoriented as far as what is day and what is night, but you still need to sleep. So there's a lot of sleep problems in space. And these sleep problems will also occur when we go back to the moon and when we go to Mars. So in the International Space Station, there is a lot of equipment for medicine, for health monitoring, but it's limited by size, weight. So for example, you'll have an ultrasound in the ISS, but you won't have an MRI because it's just way too heavy to send to space, well, with the technology we have now. So today, the astronauts spend about half of their mission time studying their own health. So there's a lot of setup time and time used to put sensors on astronauts and remove sensors from astronauts and taking measurements and taking blood samples. So part of our time with the Canadian Space Agency and NASA is making health monitoring over the long term more convenient and in a way that requires less astronaut time. So the project that is called Astroskin aims to do that. So what we've done is that we've taken all the sensors that are used in an hospital to monitor patients and design it so it can be wearable. So it can be worn by an astronaut. It can be worn 24/7 by astronauts. So the Astroskin can measure electrocardiogram activity, so heart rate, beat-to-beat intervals, breathing rate, volume. Actually, it's a lot more complex than that. We measure breathing patterns, and we can measure very fine differences in breathing patterns during the day. We measure activity levels, movement, skin temperature, PPG, SpO2, and also we also do continuous blood pressure measurement from the device. So basically we're taking very cumbersome and heavy equipment and make it lightweight and in a way that minimizes setup time and minimizes the astronaut time required to operate the system. And so the astronauts are going to wear that, and we're going to have the data sent back to Earth so that the medical teams on Earth can monitor the astronauts. So this is some drawings of some of the prototype that we've done. So you see that there's a lot of adjustment. It's different from the Hexoskin shirts that we use for clinical research on Earth. So for example, there's a lot of adjustment related to body shape changes in space. So in microgravity, a lot of fluids will quit the legs where they normally are because of Earth's gravity, and they're going to move up in the body, and this changes over time. And there's also a flap in between the legs to hold the shirts down, because again, in microgravity, these shirts have a tendency to go up. It's something that I've been noticed by people in charge of human factors at NASA for a long time. So this is an actual pictures of some of the prototypes that we've done. So some of these prototypes have been used in ERA mission in Houston at the Johnson Space Center. Other shirts, Hexoskin shirts, have been used in the high seas missions in Hawaii. So we've collected a lot of data with the technology on Earth to prepare the concept of operations in space. Everything has to be planned, and everything that can go wrong needs to be documented. Everything that needs to be done as a contingency need to be documented as well. So there's a lot of work about sending things to space that are about writing manuals that are very detailed, test procedures and usage procedures. So we're almost there now, and we're planning to have this equipment to be part of the International Space Station by the end of this year. So it's going to be available to all the world's space agencies collaborating on the International Space Station, and scientists to do life science research in space. If you're interested in using this equipment to collect data and run experiments, you can contact us or the Canadian Space Agency. We just ask and propose experiments, and we'll be happy to support you in doing that. So for more info, you can contact me. Again, I'm really easy to find. Thank you again. Merci.
Thank you, Pierre. Will the space version of the Hexoskin be available for purchase even if you're not an astronaut?
Yes, so the Astroskin is available for research on Earth as well. So we've already started to work with a few research groups, and general availability of the Astroskin for clinical research is planned for this summer.
Cool. So thanks again, Pierre. So it's time for Q&A. If anyone has a question that is participating, you can unmute yourself now and speak up. To start off with, maybe Pierre, can you share a little bit more on how you are working together with terrestrial healthcare systems? Oh, well, that's a pretty wide question. So we work with universities, with research hospitals, and different people who are setting up programs to do remote health monitoring for things like cardiac disease, respiratory diseases, rehabilitation program after an hospital stay. So we have different ways to collaborate with healthcare organizations. I think that the best way to make it work is to contact us so we can discuss the needs. And we have a process where we identify the needs, and then we try to find the optimal solution for the hospital or the health research organization. All right, cool. There's one question popped up in the chat box, and please put more questions in there, or you can unmute yourself if you want to ask your question yourself. This is Valentine, who has a question about the thermic load of the Hexoskin. Is it wearable during an EVA? Yeah, so we actually have numbers now about the thermic load, and the numbers are pretty good. The effect of the fabrics we use are made to dissipate heat very well. So I can share numbers about that if you write me an email. Right now, the Astroskin is not designed for EVA. So we're not planning to use it outside the space station. All right, thanks. I see that Olav has to leave the webinar, but I see Dorit is still in. If you have questions for Dorit, you can ask them as well. So Dorit, what is the one thing that you'd like to take away for the listeners to take away from this hour?
I think what I find most remarkable is the fact that even in a very austere environment, we love the quote, "Space is trying to kill you." It's true, but us humans can adapt extremely well. I find that really amazing, and I love the concept that biology enables organisms such as humans or other organisms as well to adapt so well to their environment. There are actually, creatures that can survive in high radiation fields or high thermal loads. The water bears come to mind. And I just find that remarkable. Remember, back in the 60s, we did not know whether humans could live in space, could breathe in space, et cetera. And now we take it for granted. So when you think about the future of mankind, will we be an interplanetary species? Well, I think we're capable of it. Whether our technology will get us there, that may be some time, but I have no doubt that we will be able to adapt to a new environment if we need to.
Thanks. And by the time we will become a multiplanetary species, the healthcare systems on Earth will be perfect too, since because of all these technologies too.
That's a moonshot.
There's a moonshot.
The moonshot.
We are at the top of the hour. I would like to thank everyone that joined today's session, and in particular our wonderful speakers that took the time to share their work and their ideas. I think both the space sector and the healthcare space can learn from each other and benefit each other tremendously. Thanks again. And with that, I'd like to hand things over to Cynthia of the ILN for some closing announcements.
Great. Thank you, Jules. And thank you to all of our presenters today. As a reminder, we did record today's session, and it will be available on both the GNIC and the ILN member sites. So please check out iln.org to revisit the session or share it with a colleague. We have some sessions coming up. Tech Tuesday will be back a week from today. We have a good treatment for you. Soon you'll be able to access it. On June 7th, our friends from Sutter Health will join us for Futures Thinking and Design Thinking. That's an ILN Virtual Thursday. And then on June 21st, we have Transforming Rural and Native American Healthcare. Again, another ILN Virtual Thursday. Thanks again to all of you for joining us. Have a wonderful Tuesday.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.